Saruman was ranked first. That rank destroyed him.
Spoilers ahead. The question most people bring to this comparison is a structural mistake before it even begins. They ask who would win in a fight, who had more raw power, who was stronger, as though the wizards of Middle-earth were a hierarchy of force, measured in the way a mountain is measured, by height. Tolkien built something considerably more precise than that, and the gap between Gandalf and Saruman is not a gap in raw capacity at all. It is a gap in alignment between what a being was sent to do and what that being chose to pursue instead. And that distinction carries consequences that reshape every scene both characters appear in. The 5 Istari were Maiar. This is the foundational fact that most film-informed audiences underweight. These were not men who learned magic, not mortal scholars who achieved some elevated state, but spiritual beings older than the world's present shape, sent to Middle-earth under a specific and deliberate constraint. The Valar, upon deciding to send emissaries to aid the free peoples against Sauron, imposed a condition. The Istari would arrive stripped of their full power, housed in aging flesh, unable to dominate, unable to compel, permitted only to inspire, guide, and counsel. This was not a flaw in the mission design. It was the mission. The Valar had watched what happened when Amaya wielded unconstrained power in Middle-earth. Sauron himself was proof of where that path ended. The Istari were sent precisely as the opposite, limited beings whose authority was meant to emerge from wisdom and courage given to others, not from force imposed upon them. Saruman understood this intellectually. He was Curunir, in the Elvish tongue, man of skill, the student of Aule the smith, the Vala who shaped the very substance of the world and whose nature ran toward craft, invention, the perfection of technique. Saruman arrived in Middle-earth with a mind that had been shaped by the greatest craftsman in existence, and that inheritance showed immediately. He learned languages faster than any of the others. He understood mechanical systems, material processes, the logic of construction and production in ways that the other Istari did not approach. The White Council recognized this. He became its head not through a vote of affection, but through demonstrated organizational intelligence, the capacity to coordinate, to plan across long timelines, to understand power structures as systems that could be studied and therefore managed. In purely technical terms, in terms of applicable knowledge and formal rank within the order, Saruman was first. That assessment was accurate at the time it was made. The problem was not the rank. The problem was what Saruman did with his inheritance. Aule's greatest spiritual crisis in Tolkien's mythology was the creation of the dwarves, an act of overreach, of so deeply desiring to bring something into being that he crossed a boundary only Iluvatar held. Aule repented. He offered to destroy what he had made. The dwarves were given true life precisely because Aule surrendered them rather than claiming them. Saruman had absorbed everything from Aule except that repentance. He inherited the desire to build, the hunger to craft, the drive to impose form on the world, without inheriting the capacity to let go of what he had built. When Saruman turned his attention towards Sauron, he did not do so in opposition. He studied Sauron's methods with what Tolkien describes as genuine admiration for their technical elegance. He understood the logic of the One Ring better than anyone alive, and that understanding was his intellectual pride. But study of the ring's logic at sufficient depth was not neutral. It drew Saruman into Sauron's mode of thought, the belief that a superior mind could take the enemy's tools and use them more wisely, as though the corruption in a method is separable from its application. His power, therefore, went in a specific direction. The voice of Saruman, the single most terrifying ability Tolkien attributes to him directly, is seduction, not compulsion. It works on those who allow it to work, those who are not shielded by clarity of purpose or love of something outside themselves. His political architecture across Middle-earth, his network of agents and informants, his industrialization of Isengard, these are real achievements of a formidable mind, and they should be recognized as such rather than dismissed. Saruman was not weak. He built something genuinely impressive within the constraints of his fallen mission.
The specific failure was that every piece of that architecture was designed to make Saruman more central to the outcome, to position him as the necessary pivot point around whom power would eventually consolidate, whether through finding the ring himself or through making himself indispensable to whoever did. Gandalf's design was almost the inverse, and Tolkien encoded this in his origin.
Olorin, Gandalf's name before Middle-earth, served Manwë and Varda, but Tolkien notes with unusual specificity that Olorin was especially close to Nienna, the Lady of Mercy, the Vala whose nature was grief and compassion, and the capacity to find something enduring in loss. Olorin learned pity from Nienna, and Tolkien does not mean pity in the modern, diminished sense of the word, as condescension toward the suffering. He means something closer to what the Greeks meant by it, the capacity to see the full situation of another being, and respond to that situation, rather than to an abstraction about it.
Olorin was, by Tolkien's account, the wisest of the Maiar, not the most technically skilled, not the most powerful in craftsman's terms, but possessed of the deepest understanding of other beings' inner lives, and therefore uniquely equipped to inspire without controlling.
He was also, notably, reluctant to go. When the Valar selected emissaries, Olorin asked to be excused, saying he was too weak and too afraid of Sauron. Manwë answered that this was precisely why he should go. This exchange is not incidental. Tolkien placed it there to establish that Gandalf's mission began in acknowledged limitation, in the deliberate acceptance of smallness, and that acceptance was itself a form of strength, because it meant Gandalf would not arrive in Middle-earth seeking to expand his role. He arrived as the smallest of the five in apparent power, carrying the red ring Narya in secret, dedicated not to his own prominence, but to kindling resistance in others. The divergence between the two wizards sharpens at every key moment once you know what to look for. When Saruman examines a problem, the question his mind moves towards is what position this puts him in. When Gandalf examines a problem, the question he moves towards is what the other person needs to become capable of. This is not a personality preference. It is an operational philosophy with cascading consequences. Saruman's agents were dependent on Saruman. Gandalf's companions consistently outgrew their need for him, which was exactly what he was trying to produce.
The Balrog of Moria is the event Tolkien uses to reveal what Gandalf actually is beneath the Wanderer's guise. A Balrog is a Maya who fell in the First Age, a being of the same order as Gandalf, corrupted and given over entirely to destruction. Gandalf's confrontation with it on the bridge of Khazad-dûm is therefore a meeting of peers, beings from the same deep category of existence. Gandalf does not defeat it easily. He dies in the process, in the sense that his body fails and his spirit returns to the Valar. What Tolkien is showing in that sequence is a being expending the full capacity of his nature in fulfillment of the mission he was given, and being renewed precisely because that expenditure was complete and aligned.
He returns as Gandalf the White, not because the Valar gave him a promotion, but because his mission was still incomplete, and his nature had expanded through the sacrifice required to hold the bridge. Saruman's power moved in the opposite direction through the same period. Every choice he made, studying the ring, building Isengard, corrupting Rohan through Grima, attempting to claim Frodo's mission as leverage, contracted the range of his genuine authority while expanding the surface area of his control. By the time of the confrontation at Orthanc, when Gandalf the White arrives and breaks Saruman's staff, the scene is not a display of Gandalf's superior firepower. It is the acknowledgement by reality itself that Saruman had forfeited the only thing that made his mission legitimate. His voice still worked on others in that moment. His intelligence was undiminished. The specific thing that broke was his standing as an Istar, the formal spiritual authority conferred by the Valar. And it broke because he had spent years using that authority in service of a purpose directly opposed to the one it was granted for. The comparison, fully examined, is not Gandalf versus Saruman in any conventional contest of power sense.
It is the demonstration, worked out across several hundred pages of narrative, of what happens to capability when it is directed inward versus outward, when the goal is self-positioning versus the completion of a mission larger than the self. Saruman had, in the early Third Age, more applicable technical knowledge. He had more organizational reach. He understood the mechanics of the ring at a level Gandalf explicitly said he did not trust himself to match, which is itself a revealing statement, because Gandalf's distrust of his own capacity to resist the ring was not humility for its own sake. It was accurate self-knowledge in service of the mission, the recognition that taking the ring would make him Saruman.
The wizard who chose to remain small, who refused the ring when it was offered, who spent 3,000 years giving his power away to others rather than consolidating it. That wizard expanded without seeking expansion, because that is what alignment with genuine purpose produces. The wizard who studied the enemy's architecture with admiration, who built the greatest military-industrial complex in Middle-earth's Third Age, who understood power in more technical depth than any living being, that wizard became progressively less powerful, because every exercise of his capability moved him further from the only thing that made the capability real.
Tolkien, writing in the shadow of the Second World War, was working through a very particular problem. What does competence look like when it has been detached from purpose? His answer, encoded in the entire arc of these two characters, is that detached competence produces Isengard, impressive, functional, temporary, and ultimately hollow. The more a being builds for itself, the less it actually has.